shimmering white towers of Gondolin stood high upon the craggy heights of the encircling mountains, an elven haven tucked away within the borders of the world. Hidden by the mountains, veiled by magic, it was a city of beauty and peace, a paradise forged in the age-old dreams of the Eldar. In the quiet stillness of the valley, the sunlight bathed the glittering city in its soft golden glow, and the air seemed to hum with a harmony that could only be created by the elves. Here, under the protection of the mighty Turgan, the city flourished. Songs filled the halls of its grand towers, laughter echoed from its streets, and the rivers wound their way through tranquil gardens, their waters pure and untarnished. Yet beneath the harmony, the shadows of an ever-encroaching darkness began to stir, and the very beauty of Gondolin became both a shield and a silent cry for help. Though the peace seemed unbreakable, the world beyond its walls grew ever darker. In the farthest reaches of Middle-earth, there was a name that haunted the minds of all who dared to listen. Morgoth, the Dark Lord, whose malice and hunger for domination had poisoned the very fabric of creation, had not forgotten Gondolin. His thirst for power burned like a fierce fire in the blackest depths of the earth, and within those flames an even darker shadow stirred. Gothmog, the Balrog, his twisted servant, a creature born not from flesh, but from fire and shadow, its form an echo of the horrors that lay beneath the surface of the world. Ancient and terrible, the very name of the Balrog was enough to chill the hearts of those who had heard the tales whispered on the winds, tales of the fires that consumed all in their path. Rumors drifted in from the farthest corners of Middle-earth, carried by the winds and by the trembling voices of those who had seen the unholy fires that followed in Gothmog's wake. In Doriath, another city of elves, fires blazed too fiercely to be mere natural flame. Creatures beyond the understanding of any being dared to step foot upon the land. The air was thick with foreboding. The whispers carried from those who had witnessed these omens a figure cloaked in shadow and fire, whose presence brought ruin to all in its path. Yet many in Gondolin dismissed these warnings, unwilling to accept the weight of such dread. But the wise, those who had seen the darkness creep upon the land, understood the truth. The forces of Morgoth were rising, and they were no longer content with the shadows of the world. They were coming for Gondolin. The city's defenders, Turgan among them, began to take action, though they did so with reluctant resolve. How could they prepare for a threat they did not fully understand? How could the light of Gondolin withstand such an enemy as Gothmog, the harbinger of fire and fury? The question lingered in the air, unanswered, as the elves moved in secret to fortify their walls, to prepare the weapons and defenses that could protect them from the darkness. But none knew how deep that darkness ran. Then the inevitable arrived. The fall of Doriath, once a vibrant elven kingdom, sent shockwaves across Middle-earth. Doriath had fallen to the forces of Morgoth, its majestic forests razed, its cities burned, the elves who survived the onslaught scattered, seeking refuge where they could. The news spread quickly, like a flame catching dry tinder. Gondolin, the last shining bastion of elvenkind, stood alone in a world that had turned its back on the light. The elves had been betrayed from within by one of their own. A traitor had let the darkness in. Morgoth's reach had extended to the very heart of their kingdom. The first cracks in Gondolin's invulnerability were revealed. The walls that had seemed impenetrable trembled under the weight of the threat now at their gates. The fires of war were no longer distant. They were closing in. The elves of Gondolin, who had long believed themselves untouchable, now faced the cold reality that no kingdom, no matter how beautiful, no matter how hidden, was beyond the grasp of Morgoth's power. The first call to arms went out. Weapons were sharpened, armor forged anew. The city, once filled with songs and laughter, now echoed with the clamor of preparation. It was not the first time the elves had faced darkness, but this darkness was different. It was an ancient evil, a primal force of destruction that had been unleashed upon the world in the form of Gothmog. The Balrog's shadow loomed closer with every passing day. The elves knew their time was running out. They were not just defending their city. They were fighting for their very existence. And so, the city of Gondolin stood on the brink, its beauty tainted by the knowledge of impending destruction. In the stillness of the night, the whispers of the Balrog's fire reached the ears of the wise. They had heard the stories of the creature that could not be slain, of the darkness that could not be extinguished. They knew what was coming. Yet even in the face of such terror, the elves held fast to their hope. For they knew that Gondolin had one advantage. The heart of the city still beat with the strength of its people. And that strength, though tested, would not be easily broken. But how long could that hope last when darkness itself bore down upon them? How long could a light survive when the very fires of hell sought to consume it? The answer was still to be written, but the song of Gondolin would soon grow silent, and its fate would be sealed by the fires that came with Gothmog's wrath. The sky above Gondolin grew heavy, a strange weight in the air, as if the very heavens sensed the impending doom. The great walls of the city stood proud, their gleaming white stone unyielding to time. But beneath that cold surface, something darker was stirring. Turgon, once certain of the city's invincibility, now walked with a heavy heart. His mind raced with thoughts of the ancient prophecies, the warnings that had been dismissed in favor of hope. His eyes gazed out across the city, knowing the peace that had defined Gondolin for so long was now a fragile illusion. The Balrog's forces were marching. The fires of Mordor were spreading, creeping like a sickness across the land. No longer were they a mere whisper in the wind now. They were a looming storm, with Gothmog at the heart of it. The first first reports had come not in waves, but in fragments, at first easily ignored, then gradually undeniable. Strange shadows, moving like smoke across the hills. Fires that burned in unnatural shapes. And whispers, always whispers, of a creature forged in the pits of Morgoth's domain, born to bring death and destruction. The elves had prepared for many things, ruthless orcs, treacherous spies, even the occasional creature of shadow. But none had prepared for the force that was Gothmog, a being not of flesh and blood, but of fire, shadow, and ancient hate. He was not simply an instrument of Morgoth's will. He was a manifestation of destruction itself, born deep within the earth, where the darkness of the world's core met the fiery fury of its molten heart. Gothmog had emerged, a force that no mortal, no creature, could easily comprehend. Turgon called his council, his voice heavy with the weight of the truth he could no longer deny. They were outmatched. The forces of Gondolin had been trained for battle, but they were not ready for an enemy that struck with the fury of the firestorms and the cunning of a predator. The Balrog was no mere beast. He was a master manipulator, playing with the minds of those around him, sowing distrust and fear. Every encounter with his forces revealed more of his power, more of his dark manipulation. As the first major clash with the Balrog's forces began, the battle unfolded with a brutality that no elven heart could have prepared for. The sound of the clash of steel was drowned out by the roar of flame as Gothmog led his legions against the city's defenses. The very earth trembled under his presence, as if it too was afraid of the darkness he brought with him. Turgon and his commanders watched as their finest warriors fought valiantly, but it was clear, no matter how hard they struck, the enemy was simply too great, too relentless. Gothmog did not fight in the ways the elves knew. He did not fight with strategy, with plans or formations. He fought with raw, unrelenting power. His flames consumed anything in their path, and the shadow he cast seemed to infect the very minds of those who dared to face him. A sense of dread fell over the defenders, not because they were afraid of death, but because they could not understand how to fight this enemy. As the battle wore on, Turgon realized that the Balrog's influence was more than physical. His mere presence fractured the unity of Gondolin's forces. The once proud city was now divided, not by walls, but by fear and distrust. And though Turgon ordered the defense to remain steadfast, even the bravest among them began to waver. The Balrog's power did not diminish. As the day wore on, it only grew. He had not come just to slay the defenders of Gondolin. No, Gothmog's true nature, his true purpose, was something more insidious. He wanted to break them, to twist their minds into despair, to turn them against each other before he struck the final blow. Night fell over the battlefield, and with it, the shadow of Gothmog deepened. The city was burning now, the flames of the enemy creeping ever closer to the gates. As the fire spread, a dark realization settled over the defenders. This was not just a battle for survival. It was a test of their very souls. How long could they endure when the very light of their city seemed to be swallowed by the darkness? And yet, as the battle raged on, a glimmer of hope flickered in the heart of Gondolin. Turgon, determined to hold his city against the tide of darkness, led his warriors into the heart of the conflict. He struck with all the fury of his ancestors, but even his strength, even the valor of the elves, could not halt the advance of the Balrog. The flames consumed everything in their path, and yet Turgon stood unbowed, a final beacon of hope amidst the despair. But even his resolve could not hold forever. The city was falling, and with every passing moment, the shadows of the past grew longer, as the revelation of Gondolin's doom began to unfold. The elves had always thought themselves safe within their walls, but in truth, their greatest enemy had been within them all along. A traitor from Gondolin's own ranks had conspired with Morgoth, allowing the darkness to penetrate the heart of the city. In the heart of the battle, Turgon's sword met the fiery wrath of the Balrog. The city's last stand was upon them, but Gothmog, relentless and unforgiving, was far more than a creature of flame. He was a harbinger of the inevitable. And no matter how fiercely the elves fought, no matter how bravely they stood, it was clear that the darkness had come to claim what was once the greatest city in Middle-earth. The moment of reckoning had arrived. As the firestorm closed in around them, Turgon made his final stand, hoping to buy enough time for his people to escape. His heart, though heavy with the weight of failure, burned with the undying will to protect his city, his people, his legacy. And for a brief, fleeting moment, it seemed that Gondolin might yet survive. But the fire of the Balrog, all-consuming and merciless, was too great. The city would fall, and with it, a light would be extinguished forever. Gothmog had claimed victory, but even in the darkest moments, the light of Gondolin would live on in the hearts of its survivors. The city's fall was inevitable, but its story would never be forgotten. And so, with the roar of fire and the cries of battle ringing in the air, the heart of Gondolin finally succumbed to the shadows that had come for it. The once proud city of Gondolin lay in ruins, consumed by fire and shadow, its gleaming towers now reduced to charred skeletons, reaching helplessly towards a sky thick with ash. The fires still burned in some distant corners, the flickering flames dancing mockingly in the night, casting an eerie light over the wreckage. The land, once alive with the vibrance of elven voices, now lay silent. The distant cries of the survivors, carried on the wind, were all that remained of the kingdom's former grandeur. Amid the devastation, those who had managed to escape moved like phantoms, their faces marked with soot and sorrow. They stumbled across the ruined landscape, eyes hollow, minds burdened by by the weight of what had been lost. The elves of Gondolin had once stood as the last bastion of hope for their people, a symbol of their strength and grace. Now, in the wake of Gothmog's relentless assault, they were nothing more than a broken remnant. The gates had fallen, the citadel had burned, and with it, their last hope for a lasting peace in Middle-earth. For those few who survived the onslaught, the world had irrevocably changed. The sky, once so clear above their home, now seemed to press down on them with the weight of defeat. The air carried the scent of smoke and death, and every step forward felt like a journey into an unknown future, one clouded with uncertainty and loss. How could they ever rebuild from this? How could they rise again when everything they had known had been destroyed? They had been betrayed not by Morgoth's armies, but by one of their own. The traitor's name was now known to all. He had opened the gates, allowing the darkness to flood the city. But it was not just his treachery that had doomed them. It was their own complacency, their own belief in the invulnerability of Gondolin that had led them to this moment. The city had fallen, not because they were weak, but because they had never truly believed the darkness could reach them. And now, the survivors carried the weight of this broken trust with them, like a heavy stone in their hearts. As they fled the ruins, the fires of Gondolin's destruction behind them, they were forced to confront the consequences of their survival. They were not the victors. They were the remnants of what had once been a great kingdom, scattered across Middle-earth like dust. Their hopes had been shattered, and now all they could do was survive, and hope that they would find some way to heal from the trauma that had been wrought upon them. And yet, the destruction of Gondolin was not just a blow to the elves. It was a blow to all of Middle-earth. Morgoth's forces had been dealt a blow at the Battle of Balrog, but the fall of Gondolin marked one of the last great victories of the Dark Lord in the First Age. His victory had set the stage for the unraveling of all that had been held dear in the lands of the elves. Gondolin, once the last hope of the elves, was now but another chapter in Morgoth's relentless march toward domination. In the aftermath, the shadows of the Dark Lord spread even further across the lands. The elves, weakened and broken, now had no central bastion to rally around. The other kingdoms, knowing that Morgoth's influence had reached the heart of Elvenkind, were left to consider their own futures. The alliances that had held them together were crumbling. The future of Middle-earth seemed more uncertain than ever. And as the survivors scattered, the shadow of Morgoth continued to grow, darkening the world with every step. For in the ashes of Gondolin, there was no longer a shining city to stand against the darkness. Only the broken remnants of a once great kingdom, their hopes for peace and victory extinguished in the fires that had consumed their home. The fall of Gondolin marked a turning point, not just for the elves, but for all of Middle-earth. The balance of power had shifted, and with it came the knowledge that the darkness had finally reached the very heart of the elves' greatest civilization. The world would never be the same again, and all that was left to the survivors was the question of what they would do now. Could they rebuild, or had the light of Gondolin truly been extinguished forever? The road ahead seemed dark, and only the courage of the few who had escaped might offer any hope for the future. But even that was uncertain, as the shadow of Morgoth stretched ever further, swallowing all in its path. The fire that had consumed Gondolin was not just a physical flame. It was a symbol of the darkness that had been unleashed upon the world, a darkness that would take generations to undo, if it could ever be undone at all. The destruction of Gondolin was but a taste of the devastation that Morgoth still had in store for Middle-earth, and the survivors knew that their struggle was far from over. In the quiet aftermath, as they gathered their wounded and mourned their fallen, they could feel the weight of the world pressing down on them. The darkness had come for Gondolin, and now it would come for them all. The once bright light of the elves had dimmed, and in its place only shadows remained. But even in that darkness, there was a glimmer of defiance. Gondolin had fallen, but the heart of its people had not yet been broken, and as long as there was breath in their bodies, the fight against the darkness would continue. The question now was not if they would survive, but how they would survive, and whether they could ever again find the strength to fight back against the shadow that had claimed their home. The fate of Gondolin had been sealed, but the future of Middle-earth was still unwritten, and that future would depend on the courage of those who had seen the fall of their kingdom and lived to carry on its legacy.